In the early 19th century, the map of Central America was reshaped by forces far beyond its borders. As the Spanish Empire faltered, its territories broke away in quick succession, experimenting with unions, federations, and brief attachments to larger neighbors. Amid the upheaval, smaller regions found themselves abruptly responsible for defining their own futures, often with little guidance and even less stability. Monte Palma emerged from this uncertain landscape as a modest republic, independent in name, yet fragile in practice. For decades, shifting alliances and local rivalries left the country without a clear center of gravity. Villa de Palma acted as the capital by inheritance rather than strategy, a colonial town carrying the administrative burdens of a state still learning to stand. A turning point arrived with the presidency of Alejandro Cárdenas del Valle. His government was imperfect, sometimes opportunistic, yet it brought a steadiness the Republic had never known. Trade expanded, revenues flowed from the coastal cities, and for the first time, Monte Palma possessed both the ambition and the means to redefine itself. Cárdenas fixed his attention on a neglected stretch of shoreline, marshland, mosquito-ridden, yet flat, open, and rich with possibility. Drained and reclaimed, it offered what Villa de Palma could not, the space to build a capital worthy of a modern nation. At its heart would stand a grand railway station, anchoring the new national line and binding the country together. To give form to this vision, Cárdenas turned to the French architect Étienne Marquette, a rising figure known for his confident handling of civic spaces. In Monte Palma, he found unparalleled freedom, and the city that emerged reflected both his training and his imagination. Mediterranean curves beside colonial echoes, neoclassical colonnades set against the light of the tropics. Around the new plaza rose the Cathedral, the ministries, and the first government halls, a blend of borrowed languages shaped into something distinctly Palman. Nearby, the early port took shape along the reclaimed waterfront, completing the triad of rail, sea, and state. From these unlikely foundations, the modern capital of Monte Palma began to rise.
Welcome back to Monte Palma. What I want to do first in this episode is to do a quick overview of what I've built out so far on the map. I'm about to move on from this area. It's mostly finished. There are a few things left to do down here. Like I have this little port area down here to fill in. It's right on the very edge of the map, so I can't really make it a functional port. It's going to be basically industrial. I also have this little ritzy residential area that I've been trying to get finished for some time now. It's a connection, like a connecting area between the historic tourist port and the modern resort, and it was basically to be filled in with rich people's homes, retirees from North America, all that sort of stuff. And it's still a work in progress. Bit of a pedestrian connection between the resort and the port city here, and it gets quite a lot of use, lots of foot traffic. I just imagine this being a collection of smaller homes, pretty expensive real estate. It's essentially overlooking a major beach here. And I also have another residential area over on this side, which also needs to be filled up. Also fairly expensive homes, maybe not quite as expensive, overlooking the beach as well, and this nice ritzy resort right down here. I don't really feel like either of those areas deserve a full episode, so it'll be work I'll be doing on the background. This little area down here, I'm imagining it's probably going to be a small village, might be some farming areas down there. I also have a couple of bays. This one here, I think finished out, this would be lots of luxury homes along the waterfront, maybe even a small resort or something down in here. So that's something to look forward to. Here I have a couple of farms that have failed since the update. I'll just have to come back in here and repair these. They might just be too small and no longer can't function. I'll have to come back and figure out what's going on with those. Other areas along here, like obviously this will probably be built out with residential neighborhoods as well. Probably also fairly wealthy. Gonna replace this bridge with something a little more, we got more options for bridges. For the work I've already done, like Fort San Sebastian here, I could come back in here. I think I could figure out better ways to build it. I think for the time being, the state it is, I'm reluctant to come back and fix earlier work if it's just more a matter of my progression of how well I'm able to build things. I'm rather inclined to leave it as is. Now for Villa de Palma, this is really still unfinished. I haven't come back here since I built it. The main plaza, the square around the plaza, that's pretty much done, but the rest of it needs a lot of work. It needs a lot more density. The surfaces need to be put in. At the time I built, this was the very first place I built, and because of that, it suffers because I didn't really know what I was really planning to build yet. A little unsure of how to go about it. It suffers because of that. I put in some leisure blocks here for the church and they don't work, so I have to remove those. And yeah, it just needs surfaces, more density, and a little more detailing to the buildings. I have a better idea of how to go about detailing these to look a little more appropriate for like a tropical climate. Here, my first initial attempts are a bit rough. Definitely can come back in here and fix all this. This also, I don't really think is something that warrants its own, like a standalone episode. This is also work that's going to be essentially be done in the background when I have some time. I'm going to get rid of this building down here. I don't like this. Okay, on to where we're going to be building our capital. Historically, Villa de Palma is the only suitable place to start a colony. Over here, we're going to imagine this as essentially marshland, swampland, mosquito-ridden. We have to think we're in tropical climate. Malaria would have been a big thing. So yeah, people didn't want to live over here. We might have had a few small farms, maybe a few fishing villages, but nothing major. It's a blank slate. According to our history now, this doesn't get developed to mid-19th century. Because of that, it can have all the hallmarks of a more modern city because it has essentially no history to it. Down here, we're going to be putting in a bit of port. We've got something that looks like a bit of a river here. A lot of what I'm going to be building here is trying to figure out how to lay it out. here we're going to be doing, this is going to be like all sorts of small villages, picturesque tourist destinations, all that sort of stuff. For the farmland here, this is going to have to be moved. We're going to need an airport. I think that's where it's probably going to go, down there somewhere. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the trees. For me, starting a city like this is always the hardest part because I really have no clear idea in my head of what the capital should look like. I don't even know where the roads are going to go. Although, because it's so flat and it's built like end of the 19th century, it's mostly going to be grid. By this point, most cities are built on a grid. That's how most of it will be laid out. I don't want just a complete grid. I want to break it up in some way to make it a little more visually interesting. I'm all about trying to make the cities as visually interesting as possible. My first thought here was maybe we extend the mountainside out a little bit, make some of this area a little more hilly, directly across the bay from Villa de Palma. This gives an opportunity to build houses up onto the hillside. Also, even though most of the city is going to be a grid, there would have been some people living out here, and for all these rural farms and fishing villages, they might not necessarily have built roads, or the dirt tracks that they started with wouldn't necessarily follow any sort of grid, but they also would have been baked into the structure of the city, like right from the very beginning. I want to try to lay out some roads that might indicate where the initial roads were from those built out grids. I also want a water crossing here. This is going to be a bit problematic. We'll get to it a bit later, but the bridge crossing there, I'm having a bit of trouble with. The biggest problem is I'm trying to imagine a history for a modern city. How might it look historically? How that translates into a modern city? What I'm building here is essentially an elevated highway, which in the modern city will probably be over top of fairly rough neighborhoods, industrial areas, and be somewhat unpleasant. Here I'm just trying to figure out for this bay here, this is going to be a modern port in the capital. It's not going to be a gigantic port. It's going to be larger than the port we just built. It's going to be about a mid-sized port. Imagine the port that was the main port during the late 19th century, early 20th century, and a much larger port would have been built at another location. So this is kind of like our in-between port. Here we have this waterway, and I thought maybe we could turn this into a bit of a river or something along that line. And this is still a work in progress. I am still thinking through this. I have an idea in my head. The port isn't the focus of this episode. It is establishing essentially the foundations of our capital, but I want to put in where I think things are going to be, where I think they might go. Now, I had this little lake out here, and I can't say I'm particularly happy with how I'm building any of this right now. So this probably will change a bit. We also are going to be building our first rail system. I need rail access to the downtown of the capital. So we're going to come back in here and essentially draw this in first, because the railroad right away would have been here for a very long time, like from the beginning of the city. We have to kind of get that in first. Obviously, our default choice for train station would be the Mediterranean one. In our backstory for our history here, country hires an architect to come in to design its center of its new capital. This is fairly common. The kind of the history I'm going for here, this isn't really, if we think in terms of Central America, this really isn't a Central American thing. This would have been more of a South American thing. So I'm like expanding the reach there just a little bit. This allows me to build an interesting looking capital, right? If I stick strictly to a Central American idea for the entire region, we are going to be building nothing but like small to mid-sized cities, because that's really all there really is in Central America. During the 19th century, Central America would have been much more impoverished than the South American countries, so it wouldn't have the resources to build this sort of capital. This is a bit of fantasy. I'm not building a real place. I'm using history here to give it like a historic plausibility. Here we come with I want a bridge connection over this waterway here, and this is where I'm having a bit of issue. Just laying down a cargo ship here just so I get a sense for height. And we need to increase the size of the passage here just a little bit so our bridge will actually work. I'm not 100% on what I want to build here. This was my first thought. It's a nice looking bridge, but I don't know if it really fits. It's the style of bridge that would be built in the early 20th century and wouldn't be a bridge here in the early 20th century. I have an idea it would be much more modern, like late 20th century, early 21st century, and so one of these, but the scale seems a bit off. It's very visible from literally everywhere, which is not bad. If the scale really is appropriate for the type of bridge it is, I just don't know if it belongs there, and I don't know which one I like better or which one's more suitable. So if you have any ideas, please, or thoughts on it, let me know, because I'm open to some feedback here. Biggest problem is, even though I'm not really focused on making a truly functional port right quite yet, I need to put in where most of its buildings are going to go. So we're going to be jumping back and forth here. I'm always jumping around all over the map, so things are going to go back and forth here as I kind of work on a bit here. I'm also thinking to get the main infrastructure down first, a hospital. The police station here, I imagine the police station here is more like a government building of some sort. Fire station. We'll have to detail these buildings out appropriately later. Now I'm going to jump back to the port again. It's only going to have one functioning crane. This isn't like a major port. This is like a smaller regional port by modern times. This is also going to have a rail connection here, so we can bring goods in by rail. I'm going to use one of Tygon's smaller rail yards here. The vanilla one is just way too big. I can't fit it in anywhere on the map that makes sense. This is quite nice. Monte Palma is not going to be an area where rail service is. There's not going to be a huge amount of rail service across the country. There's going to be cargo, and then there's going to be a couple of smaller lines connecting some of the major cities, and that's essentially going to be it. So we don't necessarily need a large rail yard, and if I do need more trains, I can always put another small rail yard somewhere else on the map. My main problem here is the grid for the port. It's going in a different direction from the grid for downtown or off the main plaza. So I have to figure out a way to connect it and still make some sort of sense. So there's a bit of back and forth here as I work my way through it. I'm just putting in the main buildings for the port. It's not even connected up or functional yet. It doesn't need to be. I just need it to be here so I can understand its relation to the rest of the city I'm building. And thanks for the viewer feedback here on why my second gates to my ports weren't working. I was essentially using the wrong gate, so thank you for that. I don't know how long that would have taken me to figure out on my own. Probably a while. Okay, so the problems with starting new cities. My problem is it's a blank slate and it's difficult to make them look good. Now, I do have a bit of a cheat here for Monte Palma because it's the capital of a former Spanish colony. We can go with Plaza. There's certain buildings that go around a plaza. Government buildings, major churches, obviously the main rail station, passenger station also will attach to the plaza. And we also need an appropriate church. For the capital, we need a cathedral, and there is no cathedral, and I need to figure out one. I thought I could splice together a couple of the vanilla city halls here, which have a bit of a unique kind of architectural detail here on the top, right? We splice them together back to back and recolor them. I think we come up with something passable as a church. Obviously, it has probably a few too many windows and stuff, but I think this works. Now, when we attach a mausoleum to the front of it here as our main entrance, all of a sudden it looks much more church-like. And I thought I'd reuse the trick with the Netherlands water tower. I go through a couple of different tries here as trying to figure out what works. I first think of two towers, but the way I have them positioned here, that makes no sense. I decided I don't really want that. I also decide that we need to move the church over a bit. Then I think of one central tower, but the problem with this is it's too close in design to the basilica we made a few episodes ago. So I'm still thinking about it. Also, using one of the extensions here, but attaching it to the back side. Like so, I can create what essentially this will be the residence for the archbishop that would be associated with this particular cathedral. So this is the residential building at the back. For the historic government building, I thought the Eastern European City Hall here would work. Finally get the idea of, we can put the water towers more on the prominent on the outside, side by side. This is where I start thinking, okay, now this is starting to look a little more appropriate. Initially, I wanted to put a central dome in the middle here and lower it down a bit. It cuts into the entrance, so it couldn't get this aligned or to look nice the way these two buildings intersect with each other. I just decided eventually that I didn't even really need it, so it goes away and we are left with a cathedral with just two bell towers. Going to use a gazebo here to finish it off, give it a little more detail on the top. The flagpoles in the center there are essentially there to help me align it so it's dead center on top of the other dome. They don't align perfectly, but as long as it don't look too closely at it, it looks perfectly fine. I have a perfect cheat for starting my city here because a central plaza for Spanish colonial towns, there was a law about it. They had to build their colonial towns on a fixed plan dictated by the Spanish state. For me, even though this is built long after Monte Palma is no longer a Spanish colony, it still has that colonial influence over it. We can definitely use a plaza here as our focal point to build out our capital. For the rest of the episode, I'm just going to be building this out and detailing it, establishing the center point for the capital. So there's not going to be a lot of building beyond this. It's just establishing our starting point and spending a bit of time detailing it so it looks appropriate. We want this to look like this is one of the more public-facing, international. When people from around the world think of Monte Palma, this is definitely going to be one of the locations people around the world would think of. So this has to carry that kind of look about it. And we have this really nice compass decal here for the center. Being a country of colonial origins, a compass with a world map makes perfect sense. So that works out wonderful. But I have this huge, gigantic, open, tiled area, and it looks really boring. So I have to figure out some ways here to decorate this in a way to make it a little more visually interesting. Plazas like this, though, are just wide open spaces with not a lot of stuff in them. So we also have to respect that. So I have to balance these two things. I'm going to break up the outer edge with some Sully's grass decals here just to kind of break up the visual pattern a bit, make it a little more visually interesting. We're going to line the entire plaza here with palm trees and spend some time detailing them out. Now I want to just get in here really quickly. Obviously, as I'm editing this, all the news about Colossal Order and Paradox Parting Ways has been out. And I just want to say, from my point of view, when I finished Owen's Bay and was about to think about how to start a new town for a new series, I was like, how did I want to approach it? With the understanding that the development schedule for the game was really slow and it might be some time before we get custom assets and all that sort of stuff. So I needed a way to figure out how to keep my interest in it and make it interesting for viewers. And I kind of let's focus on the world building rather than city building. Obviously, we're building cities, but I think a major part of Monte Palma is the world building. And honestly, nothing about that has changed. There's quite a lot to the game already. I can bash together buildings to make a lot of interesting things. So from my point of view, nothing's really changed. It's more about the story of Monte Palma. At this point, it's not about City Skylines as a game, if I'm honest. Connect our first passenger line to the main terminal here. It's not going to be carrying very many people at this point. Anyways, yeah, nothing's really changed. I am happy to see that the asset editor is finally going to be released, even though it's in beta. What that actually means, we have to wait and see. Hopefully that means we can start seeing some custom assets. My whole thing about city skylines, like especially in the original one, and we'll see how this works in CS2, it was never really about Colossal Order and all the DLCs. Really what breathed the life into CS1 was the player-made content. If we can start getting that in-game, I think we'll be okay. I think that'll be more than enough material. The reason CS lasted as long as it did was not because of Paradox or Colossal Order, it was because of what the players made and added to it. That's what kept that game going, and as long as we can get to a point where we have that, I think we're going to be okay. Already for CS2, we have things like Road Builder and Write Anywhere, which are super for mods. Those things are like major additions. As long as the modding community can still build things like that, and now that we can have some custom assets, so that keeps the visual interest for a lot of people, I think we're okay. And what happens after that, we'll have to wait and see. I've talked over quite a lot of what I've been building down here. It's a detailing project at this point and figuring out ways to make these things look a little nicer. Down here, what I'm doing behind the original government buildings is I'm adding, these are the additions to the cemetery from the Netherlands pack. And you can find these and place them down. And there's no reason why these can't be incorporated into any other park. Cemetery assets here are conflicting and doing all sorts of weird things. In the end, I decide not to use these. Although these little pools, these are also like standalone assets from the Netherlands cemeteries. I can use the pools just by themselves. Unfortunately, people want to walk through right through the middle of them, so I decide that's not going to work. So we're going to just change the way we're going to lay them out here, put them in a bit of decorative grid. Use some net lanes to cover up the paths. I quite like this Eastern European building. It has, especially from the backside of it, is a very nice looking building. But the vanilla version of it is just surrounded by pavement, which I suppose makes sense for Eastern European build. But if we just pull out the parking lots and make it a little more decorative, it really elevates this asset into something really nice looking. Yeah, Monte Palma is just going to continue on the way it is. I think maybe what I might do is just double down on the world building aspects of the game and not focus so much on what the developers and publisher is up to. Hopefully they fix more bugs, add more content. That's all great. But in its current state, nothing's changed. I can build what I need to build here. One thing to mention about the Plaza, this was designed by one architect, so it's definitely all planned, especially from this sort of time period. It'd be very symmetrical in its layout. I do little things to break the symmetry just a little bit. I think that adds a bit of visual interest. It's important to break the symmetry a bit because it really looks like it reads as like totally planned. Breaking the symmetry just a little bit just adds a little bit of visual interest. I do want to mention that at this moment, the capital doesn't have an official name yet. I'm having a bit of trouble coming up with one. I really don't know what to call the place. So if anybody out there has any ideas, please leave a comment down below. I'm more than happy to hear everybody's suggestions. I really do need some help with this one. There's a bit of a jump here. I have done down below here, filled in all the tiling and pathways around the church. Added a few pools, and there's a few taller buildings in the background now. That's just to give me a sense of scale. I don't know if any of those are going to stay. We got to remember that the historic plaza is now surrounded by a modern city, so I have to start thinking about how that's going to look. And right in front here, this is going to be pedestrian only. It's not going to be like cars aren't going to be really allowed to drive through here. Of course, some service vehicles are going to drive through there. I can't stop that, but it's a nice little visual detail, I think. And just some like edging around some of the tile surfaces here. It really does go a long way to making all this look much more finished and polished. I'm not going to show much of this. It's just like same thing over and over again. So we're going to skip over most of this. And some street furniture just to make it look inviting to come and sit and hang out. I will try to add some tourist functions to these buildings. Hopefully it'll attract a lot of tourists. I had a bit of empty space behind the church. Didn't really seem appropriate to put a building in there. So what I'm going to be building is a little private park area, obviously attached to the cathedral. It seemed like a nice way to fill in this little spot without... I didn't want a building in here that actually could compete with the cathedral visually. The building of the Capitol is going to be probably over several episodes. This isn't going to be something I'm going to be able to just crank out in a single one. We're going to be building it out in sections, trying to follow a historical pattern if possible. I did have another viewer suggestion that I should be adding a lot more like monuments and statues, and yes, 100% I totally agree. The problem is there aren't any in the game. So what I'm doing is using these stone heads as placeholders for where I think like historic monuments and statues should go. Hopefully at some point I'll get something to replace them. Down here, so I did switch over the water. It went fairly well. There's just some minor flooding on a few spots and a few tweaks to the elevation of the land here fixes all this, so no big problems. I didn't really notice a huge difference with the new water to the old water. They look fairly much alike. Here's just a view of what we built. Now this big building down here at the end, this is going to be the modern capital of the country. I'm not detailing anything about it. It's just sitting here so I understand where it is visually in relation to the plaza to everything else. Directly in front of it is going to be some more of a formal garden. Right now I'm making a reflecting pool and I'm just going to draw out a circle in the center. We're going to use the larger pedestrian path here. It's something a little wider, a little more grand. And add a retaining wall to the inside, which gives us a little lip. And then we're going to use that as the wall of the retaining. We're going to draw in a water surface here. And voila. Pretty easy. And it looks pretty good. Now for the gray vanilla pathing here, I'm just going to add on top of it another net lane. I'm not going to cover it up completely. We're going to still use the standard gray color as the border for this, but it just adds a little bit of visual detail. It just makes it a little more interesting to look at. adding just a little bit of edging to it really makes everything stand out just that much better. really didn't like the grass I chose there, so I'm going to layer up a few layers of different surfaces here and just make it a little more detailed, adding a little bit of variations. I think this looks a little better. It still has to look fairly well maintained, right? We can't have a dying grass or anything like that. That wouldn't really work for this place, but it's just a little bit of variation so it's not so uniform. I think that really does help. And there's our plaza, and that's our start of our capital. Finish up the episode, I had this little awkward area down here, and I thought the best way to deal with this is just to simply turn it into a small plaza, a fountain. So I'm just going to use surfaces here to turn this into something a little more decorative. I'm essentially using the path here as a guideline, although I realize now I can probably attach this up with some invisible paths and actually have people walk through here, so I'll probably do that. But the main function of the path is to just so I get these nice perfect circles here. Although working through it, things are slightly lopsided. It's really difficult to get the alignment just absolutely perfect, but I think any distance, and if you don't look too closely, I think everything looks fine. And a little tweaking of it later, I do get it to look a little more centered. I'm not too worried about it though. that brings us to the end of this episode. I realized that for most of this, I didn't really talk about the stuff I wanted to talk about, everything happening with Colossal Order. I thought I needed to say something about that. This is just the start of the capital, as I said. And we have several more episodes. We've got a rail yard, we've got the port, we've got the modern city center, which needs to be built out, and historic neighborhoods that need to be filled in, and how this connects out, like how the rich and the poor coexist in this particular city has to be figured out as well. Lots and lots of work to be done. I feel Monte Palma is more about the world building I'm doing than it is about City Skylines II as a game itself. The game isn't going anywhere, so Monte Palma isn't going to go anywhere either. For everything else, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. And to be perfectly honest, over the next few years, things are going to be so different, right? It's hard to really predict what's going to be happening. Let's put on some finishing touches here to the fountain, and we are at the end of the episode. Once again, thank you so much for watching to the very end. It really helps with the visibility of the channel, so thank you so much. And I will see everybody in the next episode. Bye.